Hey there, Bay Area. This is ICAN Talk, and this is Vivian speaking. Today we have Binh Danh with us to talk about art and the Asian American representation in art, as well as other topics, and hopes to inspire our community. Binh, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Binh Danh. I am a native Bay Area artist and art educator. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you today.
Awesome. We also have Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I am a graduating senior at SF State, and I'm the marketing assistant for ICAN, and I'm excited to talk about art today.
Great. So, Binh, how would you first describe your art?
Well, I guess I'll start with just saying that I'm a photographer. I mainly use the camera to explore issues of identity, issues of even the photographic process. I guess, my claim to fame, if you want to put it that way, I developed a process of printing on leaves by using photosynthesis. And that was my undergrad work at San Jose State University, almost more than 20 years ago. So it's been quite a long journey. And then these days I'm using a 19th century process called Daguerreotype to explore other issues of identity and landscape photography in the national parks.
That's really amazing. What led you to these specific processes?
Yeah, and so what led me to these processes is just because I just enjoy, that photography is not just like a digital medium, it's not something on our cell phone, but the process of making a photograph is pretty complex, especially when you're doing it the 19th century way. And of course, going back into the past, what kind of just led me to photography in general is that it's a visual language, and I'm really obviously very, very visual myself. I'm not really good with the other part of skills that anyone would need. I guess I got better with speaking skills, and math is okay. All the stuff that I kind of fall behind a little bit when I was a kid growing up in San Jose, California. But I just love art. Just growing up, I love taking art classes. During the summer, I'll take summer school and I'll make sure I enroll in art classes, watercolor painting, and photography became something really natural for me to gravitate towards. And I think it also has to do with that. When I was growing up, I was seeking out a history. And I didn't know I was doing that. Obviously, it wasn't until I became a college student that I realized that I had a history, like an Asian American history. But just growing up, just knowing that, I was born in Vietnam in 1977. I came with my family as refugees to the United States, or we landed in the United States. We could have gone anywhere. And knowing that I just had this history that is not documented. Well, it's not documented as in like a history book, It is documented verbally through family story, but it was also for my parents, it was also hidden from you. They didn't talk a lot about the Vietnam War. We talked about the refugee experience, but it was more like the adults growing up in the household, like with Southeast Asian, other families, Cambodian, Laotian, and Vietnamese, just listening to them talk about these pasts within their own experience and their own memories. So I tend to kind of seek out that history through photograph. And of course, there's a lot of pictures of the Vietnam War. Vietnam is associated with a war, and not like a country. It's kind of a war. So it was through that sort of visual language growing up that it came to be something that I seek out too in my work today, like those photographs that I became so familiar with, and that history that is in the mediated history of the war.
I just wanted to quickly put in it's a big struggle for my generation and the old generation. A lot of us weren't taught Vietnamese, like Vivian and myself. We weren't taught Vietnamese, so we don't know much about our family history. So that oral history is just lost to us. those stories of our family back in Vietnam. And a lot of times your parents are they don't want to remember the war, so they don't want to tell you. So being able to like see those photographs of how they were, it says so much more that words can't convey, especially with that language barrier. So I feel like you finding photography and bringing that bridge between language barrier and oral history and family histories is just really amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because I think photography, obviously in culture in general, photography is really important. You know, it's important to document faces of the past. And I grew up in a very traditional Vietnamese Buddhist household, and there was always altars and there's photographs there. And you go to the Buddhist temple, there's altars of the community members who passed away. And coming to the US, there was like no photograph of Vietnam at all. It was just like, and even just really strange, just growing up, my parents really rarely photographed us, because I think it was something that, obviously the technology was not readily available, right? It was like, it's all film based, and you only photograph, of course, very special occasion, right? So just growing up, I didn't have those pictures. Like I didn't have pictures of myself as a kid. Like kids today, like Vietnamese American kids today, which just the parents would just bombarded them with like photography, with just photographing every minute of their lives, right? And I've always just kind of really find photograph fascinating, especially when I look through the albums of like finally later on, like our relatives and grandparents in Vietnam start sending pictures over to the US. And there are these like black and white pictures of like me as a baby and like our families, in some sort of studio. And it was, again, just kind of like amazing to see that. And that's kind of how, again, just I find photography so fascinating that way too. Like it becomes an object that we can actually start generating a conversation, right? And it opens up a dialogue between generations.
That's amazing. And it's also very just awesome to see how passionate you are about the topic itself and how you tie the history of yourself and your culture to photography. Knowing that a lot of parents would prefer their children not pursue the arts because there is that kind of bias that the arts profession is not stable. How did your family feel about you pursuing photography?
Yes, that's a very, very good question. And yes, as a art educator at San Jose State University, the arts is not an easy route. I think anybody who majored in the visual arts or any sort of creative practices they do it because they're in love with that process, with that medium, with that expression. And I think that love carry them further in life when they do something like that. I think in general, anybody with a college degree is able to make ends meet. Just because you major in the arts, it doesn't mean that you graduate just becoming a full-time artist, a self-employed artist and trying to make ends meet and piecemeal too. There's folks who do that, and you could really do that really well, And I think people start to figure out what they want to do in life with an art degree when they figure out that they want to work in the commercial industry, or they want to go into Hollywood, or they want to work within the galleries or run like nonprofit art galleries for the community, or in museum world, so many creative positions, but you're still, within the creative industry, right? So that's kind of what like a degrees in the arts kind of gave you. Now, having said that, of course, when I was a high school student, I did not know that the arts will bring me to, pursuing a master in the fine arts, and then on to becoming a professor and an educator, right? Obviously, that wasn't like, I didn't know that that was my future, right? I just had to follow my dream, right? I always loved this quote by Steve Jobs, we want to bring it back to STEM. Steve Jobs, had an art degree. He went to a liberal arts college, and he talks about how taking a typography class about typesetting, the design and the beauties of all that kind of had him pursuing the Mac computer, right? All that sort of thing. So it's about creativity. And I think that's what the arts can give people, is that it allows them to think outside of the box. There's always going to be artists working in corporate industry, right? They'll be working in tech industry because they're the one who has that creativity. They're the one who are in tune with culture. And of course, culture is very, very important because that's what gets us what we have in life, right? That give us the design and the engineer can make the thing happen, but it's the culture who brings these stuff to the mainstream in a way, right? Now I know I'm going on a tangent, but let me just back up to answer your point, right? So when I was when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to study photography because I just fell in love. After taking science classes, and in high school, I was encouraged to start thinking about college and thinking about like, well, what you want to do in college, what you want to major, and I think in my sophomore year on to my senior year, I was just in love with just the art classes. And I figured, well, that's what I want to do. I found out that, wow, you can actually major in art in college. And I remember as a, high school student trying to explain to my parents, like, there's actually, like, you can major in art. And my parents were so confused, like, why would anybody want to major in the art? And I told my father, like, yeah, there's actually music classes. You can become a music major. And of course, like many Vietnamese men and women, karaoke and music is something they love to pursue. I think everybody wants to be some sort of like musician, right? My father always enjoyed doing this stuff like that, and they were still not certain about like me going in with a going and majoring in like the arts in San Jose State, But I think my parents thought that we came to this country for a reason. It is to give our kids an education, right? That was the primal reason. And it was for my parents, it was like, they say that you can major whatever you want. We totally understand. You can major whatever you want. You just have to finish college. Getting us into college and getting us out of college was their goal. And I was very fortunate to have that, that my mother helped me out with paying to my mother, my father too. We own a TV repair shop. It was a family business. I went to work every day as a college student. Right after work, I go back and work help my dad. So in a way, I was kind of paying my own way throughout college with the family business, right? And all that went into supporting my college experience. And again, like I said, I'm just very fortunate enough to be able to do what I do today as an artist and an educator, because I kind of follow my heart, and kind of got me where I want to, right? Now, having said that, of course, if you're into STEM, if your like child loves math and loves STEM and loves tech and want to pursue that, there's people like that, go for it, right? Because that's where you kind of just follow your dream and see where that takes you. And I think anybody with like an immigrant mentality, that's what you do. You kind of just go for your dream, because it's like, wow, you're living in a country that allow you to do that, right? It's, I always tell my students, now I'm going to butcher it up, the Declaration of Independence is liberty and the pursuit of liberty and we yada yada. But the important thing for me is not liberty, it's all that, it's actually the happiness part, the pursuit of happiness. I think happiness is really important. And of course, if I was doing something that I'm not happy, I just have to change my life, right? If I'm not happy, like with whatever job it is, then I gotta find something else, because when it comes down to the end of the day, like happiness is more important than money, right? I mean, learning how to live within your means. And I think like artists know how to do that. Like I have one of my cousin, he's a chef, he's a head chef, and he didn't go to college. He had like, a little bit like any college kids, kind of not being able to figure out what he wants to do in life. It wasn't until later that he got into food. And now he's like a head chef, he just loves learning, loves doing the food and the process of that, the art of that. And that's just so wonderful. Like he's able to do that. And, it doesn't pay as someone who works in tech, but at least he's happy and he find out something that he loves doing. And I think that's the most important thing, is trying to figure out like what you like, what makes you happy. This is like that old saying, you figure out what makes you happy and you never have to go to work a day of your life, because every time you're doing what you love doing anyway, and you're able to make an income with it, and that's just the goal, I guess, in figuring out a balance between career and life.
That's awesome. So for the parents that might be listening, how important do you think it was for you that your parents were supportive of your decision? Like, do you think that was a big contribution towards your success?
Well, yeah, definitely. I think one thing too is that I did tell my parents, I figured out early on as an undergrad that, that if I do want to become a professor, all I need to do is get my MFA. So that was always the goal too. That was also to finish my undergrad degree, my Bachelor of Fine Arts in photography, and then go on and going to finding an MFA program, a Master of Fine Art program. And with that degree is, what they call a terminal degree for the visual arts. And with that, I can actually become a professor, or I can actually even teach high school or something like that. So I told my parents that this obviously doesn't work out. My goal at the end of the day is actually to become a teacher. And for them, the idea that a teacher is in Vietnam is an honorable profession. You always respect your teacher, you respect your thầy, So it was that they really encouraged, like, okay, that's awesome too, because something that something that they really think highly of, that teacher. And along with like the visual arts in high school, I figured out that I was really good at teaching. I was really good at working as a lab monitor, showing other high school students like how to print. I figured out how to be a good student later on. I think when I was in the third grade, my parents were really, really worried about me, because I was just like not there. I literally had all F's like in third grade, because with third grade, as a kid, I was just like looking outside. When I was sitting there in class, all I just do was just looking outside a lot. And I didn't speak English really well. My parents, of course, didn't speak English. So I didn't learn English as most kid growing up in the US, they were surrounded with English. So I didn't start speaking English until again, the third grade. So that was really difficult for me. So it was something, I don't know what happened, but I think I started to realize from later on, like middle school and high school, that I became a really good student. I figured out how to get all A's, like within the math. Like I actually got really good with math. I think it was also that I had my parents, our family business, to kind of protect us, because it was like, that's what I needed to do. Go to school and then go back home and work, and do my homework at work as a little child, and after work was like, I was helping my father with service call, going around and fixing people's TV afterward. So there was really like no time, like I was never out of sight from my parents, right? So I think I somehow, again, because of all that life experience that's early on, it kind of obviously made me the person I am today, which is always very, very technical. I'm very good with my hands, watching my father fix TVs and things like that, and understand electronics. So yeah, I could have followed his footsteps. I think that's one thing actually my parents didn't want me to do, didn't want any of us to do, and I'm like the youngest of 4 kids, was to actually follow their footsteps, which is which is opening up like your own business and working for them. Even though my mother and my sister went out and actually opened up a salon together for several years because it was, they became partners. So yeah, anyway, I know I'm going on a tangent here, but if you want to jump in.
Going back to what Vian was saying in the beginning, like, did it contribute to your success? And I think hearing that encouragement from your parents and getting their support really not only helps you like actually doing it, but also, I mean, like mentally and emotionally, it really helps you. And I feel like maybe that has helped you also like open your mind and like be able to pursue your art and passion without having those worries of, what do my parents think, or like, are they gonna be mad at me for doing these things? But seeing that, hearing that support and love from your family is not only is it easier worries, but it's actually a motivator too, because now you're like, I want to thank them because I have something similar. Like, my family has always been pretty supportive of my decisions. Being able to have my family support, I've realized how lucky I am amongst my friends who maybe don't have their family support. While I do, I've had a much easier time in college. I feel like having that kind of similar experience has really helped. So if there are parents listening to this one, your child hearing your support would mean the world to them. Like, especially during this time, not only just during COVID, but during such a transitional time of their life, being able to still be accepted and loved by their family is so big.
And it's also important that you help your parents understand these things too. Like, understand, there's so much out there with career choices, right? I think if you have it within your heart to pursue something, I think you should definitely try to get your parents on board. And you never know, because they probably have a creative pursuit too. They probably want to, like my mother loves gardening, and I find that that's her creativity. She loves doing it. I mean, she's not making money off it at all, but she just loves growing things, and it gives her joy and happiness. And I think that's one thing. And I always read like these accounts too, like in like the Vietnamese American community. Some like early on, let's say like in the 1990s and early on, kind of like that period, like I'm thinking like Andrew Pham's book Catfish and Mandala, right? And how he talks about he was an engineering student and gave that all up to write his book, and then now now's a famous author, right? And so that there's like this kind of generation that really took on a little bit of like a burden. And I think for them, it was actually because it was just the art wasn't around, right? For them to even think about majoring in the arts. And I think, like Megan, you mentioned you're graduating soon from SFSU, right? And you're kind of my student generation in a way, even though I'm just in my, my early 40s. But like your generation, I think your parents probably are like my aunts and uncles age, I guess, and who they probably came to the US in their like maybe 20s and 30s. So yeah, I think that what I'm trying to say is kind of figure out, like, for each generation as we move forward, I think it does kind of get a little bit easier and easier too. And that first wave of the 1975 folks are like, hardcore, because it's like, this is your chance kind of thing. And even growing up in the US too, it was like, I remember like I took a Vietnamese language school, like my parents enrolled me early on in Vietnamese language school, and I fight against it a lot because I was like, I'm an American kid now, why do I have to learn this stuff? And then when I will go there, they would just say like, this is temporary, like we're gonna go back to Vietnam someday. And that just like scares me, and I was exposed with all these like pictures of the Vietnam War. Like, this is like what Vietnam looks like. It's like a ghetto, and of course it's not that. It's just because the media shows that it's a ghetto, right? So it really scares me. So I kind of fight really against that, and almost like this reason why like I'm not really good at speaking Vietnamese today, even though I can still speak Vietnamese to my parents because it was something very natural that comes out of my mouth when I'm with them. You know, I won't be able to translate, you know, be a translator. So, and I actually find out, you know, kids and younger generation who grew up here speaking much more better Vietnamese than I do because their parents enrolled them in Vietnamese language school. And I think that's awesome too, because you actually now are really truly bilingual, and you can actually be that bridge too between, you know, the East and the West. So yeah, I actually find that this is an amazing time to be. In some way, it's crazy with API hate and all that, but I know we will get through this. But just an amazing time to be an Asian American and a Vietnamese American because of so much of the arts out there, you know, that and there's so much Vietnamese are making like leadership roles in, you know, the larger mainstream society. And it's just great in general, I think so, just to keep that going.
Yeah, and something you mentioned earlier that kind of stuck with me is that there's such a huge variety of like careers and positions within the art community. It's not just, oh, you're going to be painting or just taking photos and submitting it to be purchased. But for example, I actually graduated with a literature degree, but now I'm in marketing. There's a huge variety, and even for me, when I was studying into what careers that you could pursue with a literature degree, there's even roles in the tech industry right now. Like someone has to be providing all these graphics and writings for the jobs. Even for the government, like they have to hire someone to create those images for them when they post things out or when they're doing outreach to the community. They need planners and coordinators to set up these meetings and put the county in the best light possible. And that's only possible with the arts degrees.
Yeah, that's right. If you think about design, right? Somebody has to design it. Someone has to think about it, how it's going to look, how it's going to fit in your hand. And there's people who love doing that. You know, there's people who just are really good at that. Imagine like back in the caveman's day, right? I'm probably the one who likes to stay in the cave and like work closely on something rather than going out and hunting, you know, because I was good at it. I figured out, well, he's good, then leave him in the cave, you know, let him do his thing because he's contributing to society. And I think that's you know, we can all try to figure out how we want to do that. As anybody with a college degree, like, how do you become a good citizen? How do you also give back to your community, right? And you give back to your community by doing the things you love and helping others along the way. And I think it's so important. So the more and more like creative Vietnamese Americans out there, the more and more this becomes a thing, right? We just, you know, we could, you know, we think about other Asian ethnic groups who've been in the U.S. a little bit longer, like Chinese and Japanese. You know, they have like like the Asian Arts Museum, or the majority of it, you know, it's like very Chinese centric. Or they have the Chinese Cultural Center and like, you know, all that. You know, they've been a little bit around a little bit longer, you know, and they're able to add more to the creative kind of elements of America in a way. And I think it's time that Vietnamese Americans do that too, because if we don't do that, we'll be just left in the dust, right? And the only way there's not the only way, but one of the main ways to do it is put out our own culture, put out the stuff that we want to see that reflects ourselves, and show the community that we're here, we're here. We want we want you to see us, and you could see us by looking at our arts and looking at our fashion and looking at our food. Is totally fine with me too. There's a lot of famous Vietnamese American chefs out there who are doing very hybrid sort of cultural mixing, and it's just really all kind of just wonderful. You know, it adds to that pot. You know, and I'm not saying the melting pot, but I'm saying like the Vietnamese American pot, the pot of love that's there for us to keep slurping as we're moving along in this new American identity, right? We kind of make a new Vietnam for us, a Vietnam in America.
So going back to the students, what would you like to see from your future students, the ones in your classes right now, future ones that may attend your art classes? What would you like to see from the new generation of artists?
Well, definitely. I mean, in general, I like artists to investigate what's really important to them, right? And of course, obviously, if like Vietnamese American identity is not something they even consider, then don't pursue what's really important within the arts. Right? If that's design, if that's becoming a fine artist, I think all artists has the right to do what they want to do, right? I think it's really important, that freedom of expression. So basically, I think just finding your true calling, whatever it is, the subject matter, the medium, is what you're going for. I think that's just liberating, right? That you don't actually have to think about these societal topics in your art. Even though maybe the Western culture will want you, sometimes we get pigeonized that you're a Vietnamese American, you only do things about Vietnamese American. You have the right to, right? But I have the right to do anything I want. I can actually, which I am doing now. Like I go to Yosemite and make landscape photographs that, thinking about like Ansel Adams photography, right? I'm making like just landscape, but then because I had to put my own flavor in it, I use a Daguerreotype process, which is a 19th century process, the first photographic process. And the uniqueness of this process is that you see your own reflection in the picture. So when people look at my photographs of Yosemite Valley, they see themselves within this federal landscape, and they think about how do they relate to this land, right? And of course, that's what I get away with my work. Someone else could totally think about something totally different. Art is all interpretation. But I just getting back to your question is that you just have to kind of figure out what it is that you like doing within the arts and pursue that. And there's many internationally. There's a lot of Vietnamese artists, the Vietnamese diaspora, even blue chip Vietnamese artists who don't deal with the stuff like I like to deal with, who don't deal with identity issue, who just like do abstract painting and have made a whole career with that. If your parents ever curious, just introduce them to these artists, because there is a market out there for Southeast Asian artists who are internationally.
For the students that are listening right now, what artists would you recommend that they look into, like Vietnamese artists in particular?
Yeah, so within the visual arts, I definitely recommend. There's many. Amy Lay is the one that I think goes right up to the list, and she's a photographer. When she was at Stanford University, she was a biology major, and then she took a photo class, and then she fell in love with it and totally changed career path, and now is like the most known Vietnamese American photographer. Even saying. Leaving the Vietnamese out, just an American photographer. And several years ago, she won the MacArthur Genius Award for photography. That's so like highly respected, right? So I think she's like the only Vietnamese American who won that for visual arts. Dinh Q Lê is another wonderful artist to look up. Pippo Nguyen. There's a lot on the list, and of course, if you go on to like places like DVAN, which is Diaspora Vietnamese American Network, which is more literature. I'm sure Megan, you're familiar with DVAN. But those are just kind of two came to mind. And in general, Asian American artists, there's a whole list to think about. And right now, there's also a lot of focus on Asian American artists. There's a focus on Asian American kids because of all that AAPI hate that's going around. And so I know like Stanford right now has has started an initiative of collecting Asian American arts into like the Cantor Arts Center. It's like 20 years later, they look at why there's like a proliferation, like collecting Asian American artists is because of what's going on right now, right? It's just because they were not looked at in the past, and because they were not looked at, people ignored them, right? and now we are looked at. So it's a very interesting time. Yeah, we'll see where we go from here.
Do you see any differences between your generation of young artists in comparison to, say, Megan and my generation right now?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I think your generation, millennials, or even after that, I don't forgot. You might have to remind me. Z generation? I don't know. What generation you mean? I mean, millennials are in the 30s now, so they're like old folks.
Yeah, I feel like me and Vivian are like in that weird period between millennial and Gen Z. It's the very odd generation.
Yeah.
Like we came out, all of us were like just barely coming around, like during, say, for instance, the 9/11 incident. So a lot of transitions. So I think they were saying like from the years of like 1994 to 2000, it's that very awkward stage. Like you don't know which generation you are. So it's very interesting the way we think in comparison to millennials and Gen Zs.
Yeah, because I think, well, we don't have to get a topic on generation here, but you know, I'm considered, of course, Generation X or something like that. I think, you know, right after. Anyway, back to your question. I think that the difference is that I think younger artists today are pursuing really general topics within the arts. You know, I think issues of just aesthetic. And which is wonderful. I mean, art on the foundation is about aesthetic, it's about beauty, which one consider beauty. But at the same time, you know, as Megan was talking, you know, there's just a proliferation of just really interesting topics too. You know, it could be some of it is aesthetic, or just strictly aesthetic. You know, hasn't do anything with identity. But at the same time, there's always like identity attached subliminally to it somewhere. You know. And it's just wonderful just to see what happens. You know, like the curators, that's another profession, curating, who are interested in looking at Asian American art and particularly Southeast Asian art, will be able to put together, you know, a show of what's going on with very contemporary artists. You know, there's like young artists now in the Whitney Biennial, young Vietnamese American artists in the Whitney Biennial. And I look at their works like, wow, this is just out there. I just never seen anything like it, because they're coming from a totally different upbringing, right? And it's so wonderful too that they're able to just explore these other different topics that you know. And then of course, a career within the arts is like a lifetime career, right? It doesn't just stop because you graduate. It's actually it starts when you graduate, and then you keep making art, and your work would constantly change as you grow and change.
Thank you so much. So I guess for our last words on this, what advice or tips or last comments do you have to the young budding artists in our community?
Advice. Okay, so as we all know, it's very expensive to live in the Bay Area. So, and the one thing about living in, like, being a Vietnamese American is like being able to live in like a multi-generation household. So I think my advice is if you can do it, save money. Save money by living with your parents. You know, it's I think nowadays, I think mainstream America, it's like, you know, kids are still living at home because it's a totally different time now. Like, you know, you could stay on your parents' healthcare till you're like 25 or something. It's totally different. When I was growing up, it was like, you know, when you're 18, like the American mentality was like, yeah, get out of your parents' home, or you're not truly an adult. But these days, it's like, you know, I love being close by my parents. You know, I don't live with them anymore, but when they get really old, you know, I want them to come and live with me. Actually, I want to actually take care of them, and you know, because you know they brought us here, they give us like this life, and we just have to return the favor. So that is my advice. Respect your parents, listen to them, but also encourage them and help them.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much. I think that's the end. Is there anything that you would like to plug? Where can they find your art? Or you could talk about some of your classes?
Well, let's see. I teach at San Jose State. So if you're ever looking for an art career, art degree, find me at San Jose State University. Yeah, I'll plug that.
Thank you so much for your time with us. I think everyone listening has learned a lot about what art is to you, and you gave amazing tips about how to succeed in the business as well, and even to talk about parents about the arts career. So thank you so much, and everyone listening, have a nice day.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I wish you well in your journey in life and art.